The manager of the National Theater in Westwood says that there indeed are at least a dozen people who faint or become ill during every showing.
Let's start by looking at a scene from a movie that premiered in 1973. I know the pacing is probably painfully slow, and maybe you're already mentally twitching, wanting to pull out your phone or switch to another video. But this isn't a scene from a meditative character drama. Instead, it's from the biggest blockbuster spectacle of that year.
My legs are just going, and I want to go in the lobby and not watch it, and I have to cover my ears.
There were reports of people screaming and running out of the theater.
I fainted like 10 minutes after the first beginning of the movie.
Becoming ill and vomiting, being carried out of the theaters on stretchers. It incited a genuine moral panic, with some religious groups believing the movie was causing demonic possessions. But it was also wildly popular.
Are you going to go back in and see more of the movie now?
Probably, yeah.
And scalpers reportedly would sell tickets sometimes for hundreds of dollars.
I don't know why I waited 4 hours to see that.
The Devil Mater did it, I bet.
The #1 box office movie of
A movie that so profoundly shook the culture that Jason Zinnemann, writing for Newsweek, said, "The Exorcist opened in theaters across the country, and since then, all hell has broken loose." This movie ran in the theaters for 2 years. A lot of people credit The Exorcist for playing a big role in starting up the satanic panic, something that was still going on 20 years later when I was born in the 90s. But if you released this movie now, in 2025, what would happen? It would probably do well at the box office. Horror movies are still a pretty good bet. And The Exorcist is a well-constructed, scary horror movie. But I don't think it's hard to argue that it wouldn't have anywhere near the same cultural impact. And this isn't just because culture has become less religious. Jaws, which was released just a few years later, inspired a similar kind of cultural panic. Not a religious one, but one that has such a profound effect that to this day, some scientists call our collective irrational fear of sharks the Jaws effect. Movies just don't have the same kind of cultural impact that they used to. Sure, people still might flock to the theater for a Minecraft movie or Barbenheimer, but they're being drawn in by massive marketing budgets and stories that draw from existing intellectual property. I could be wrong, but while Barbenheimer might have trended on Twitter and TikTok for a week, it doesn't seem like either movie will inspire a shift in mindset on Barbies or atomic bombs that will echo through the culture for decades. At least not anywhere near the scale we saw with something like The Exorcist or Jaws. Now you might think, and maybe you thought when you clicked on this video, that what I'll be saying is that movies just aren't as good. But I think that's a little bit of a cop-out. Sure, The Exorcist and Jaws are incredibly well-crafted films. Friedkin and Spielberg were basically at the top of their game technically. They knew how to wield all the forces of cinema that were available to them at that time for maximum effect. Sure, in some ways, the day-to-day fare at the box office might not be at the same quality level as The Exorcist or Jaws, but there are still incredible movies being made today, and I don't think the shift in average quality is enough to really truly explain the dramatic shift in cultural impact that has happened over the last 50 years. If you released a movie like The Exorcist today, it wouldn't have the same impact. That means something else has changed. We've changed, the culture has changed, how we respond to the movies has changed. And I'm not saying going to the movies isn't fun anymore. There are plenty of movies that provide cool, entertaining, even sometimes awe-inspiring experiences at the cinema, but it doesn't quite feel the same. And even in the last 5 or 6 years, I feel like the experience of what going to the movies has changed for me. And I get the feeling that it also has for a lot of other people. To get to the bottom of this, we're going to have to delve into film history, and we're going to have to dig a little bit into some media theory. But I hope you stick with me, because understanding why movies feel so different now is just a window into understanding why many parts of our culture feel different now than they did even just 10 years ago.
You see, suddenly, if you've noticed, the mood of North America has changed very drastically.
This video is brought to you by Ground News. Go to ground.news/ThomasFlight to get 40% off. Chicago, January 6, 1951. The Zenith Radio Company begins testing an exciting new technology. If you're one of 300 test households, for $1, you can order a movie directly to your home television set, simply by sending a phone signal. Seeing this, movie theaters and studios, already feeling pressure from antitrust regulations and the rapid explosion of home television, feared Phonevision posed an existential threat. What will happen, they speculate, if movies can skip the theater and go straight to people's televisions at home? The industry pushes back, even lobbying the government to try to ban early pay-per-view movies. And while the technology didn't take off at the time, their fears were not unfounded. TV would not spell ultimate death for cinema, but by the 1950s, theater attendance was already in decline from its peak in the 30s and 40s. It's hard to overstate just how big a deal movies were in the first half of the century. Theaters were a foundational American institution. In 1940, some reports indicate that over 60% of Americans were attending the cinema weekly, 20% more than were attending religious services each week. The cinema was a community gathering place. Small local neighborhood screens would show one movie at a time. The newsreels that ran before films were often the only opportunity citizens had to get a glimpse of the Second World War as it unfolded abroad. This was the era of the Hollywood studio system, with each of the big studios cranking out over 100 movies each year. But by the 50s, cinema attendance was in free fall. The Hollywood clergy and theater owners were panicking. Could cinema compete with the ease and convenience of the entertainment now available in the comfort of people's homes? Some in the industry attempted to ease their worries by recalling how Hollywood had already overcome significant threats. One exhibitor told Box Office magazine it was new and improved methods of presentation that had turned the tide in cinema's costly, discouraging, and prolonged fight against radio entertainment. TV shook the industry. And with antitrust regulations that made it so the studios couldn't own their own theaters, and other post-war cultural changes happening at the same time, by the 1970s, the number of theatrical admissions had fallen over 70%. But the movies wouldn't die so easily. To try to win back audiences, theaters and the studios made the movies bigger and more exciting, implementing widescreen CinemaScope, 3D, and better sound. Movies like Jaws, The Exorcist, and Star Wars found people lining up around the block. These new, bigger, bolder cinematic experiences called blockbusters gave cinema attendance new life, and by the 80s, moviegoing had stabilized, and with rising ticket prices, box office income was hitting all-time highs. But even though this new world of multiplexes and blockbusters still had significant cultural influence, the movies and Hollywood had changed forever. They would never again represent the same thing to society that they had in their golden era. In January 2007, just 6 days after Steve Jobs announced a technology that would shape the coming decades, a company that mailed DVDs to subscribers announced Watch Now, a service that would allow consumers to instantly watch a movie on their computer. These two technologies together would set in motion a transformation in how we consume media over the next decade, eventually sending the film and TV industry into the state of crisis it currently faces. But as Hollywood faces this new threat, I want to tell the story of a force that has already changed cinema irrevocably. This is the story of how the movies have been reshaped throughout their history, not by what plays within the four walls of the theater, but by everything outside those four walls, and how cinema must respond if it wants to maintain its cultural relevance.
Cinema is a language about to get lost, an art about to die. It's obvious that it's on the way out.
Since cinema was born, basically every generation has been grappling with what it perceives to be the death of the medium. Basically, every technological innovation has been perceived as a threat by cinema. Some of these have proven to be credible, but other concerns, like concern about color filmmaking or home video, have proven to be false alarms, with theatrical attendance actually going up during those periods. But in 2025, I think cinema does face the most credible set of challenges it's faced since the 1950s. Like they did with TV, studios initially resisted streaming before eventually scrambling to join in. As streaming services like Netflix have grown into full-scale studios and studios began starting their own streaming platforms, it began a transformation in the economics of filmmaking that we're still in the midst of now. And when a global pandemic cratered the box office to all-time lows, the shift to streaming felt like a lifeline for the studios. Theatrical windows have shortened, already down from the 2 years we saw with The Exorcist in the 70s to an average of 90 days. Now we're down to just a few weeks, or in some cases no exclusivity at all. Consumers already burdened by lingering pandemic fears and economic pressure combined with rising ticket prices increasingly opt to wait for a streaming release. There are reports claiming that Hollywood studio backlots, once the site of production for a global cultural force, have been sitting dormant. And in 2023, industry unions engaged in historic strikes to fight for fair compensation in the midst of these changes. And the movies themselves have been changing. As bigger budget narrative TV entered a golden era during the dawn of streaming, the stories that made up many of the mid-budget rom-coms, adult comedies, and dramas moved to television. This is how in 1980 you have a movie like Caddyshack for $6 million, in 1996 you have Happy Gilmore for $10 million, and then in 2025 you don't see any mid-budget sports comedies released in theaters. But you do get a show like Stick from Apple TV, who likely spent much more than was spent on either of those movies on the show. A show written and produced by Jason Keller, who's worked almost entirely in film before this, and starring Owen Wilson, whose career also used to be entirely in film before it transitioned to television in just the last 5 years. And Happy Gilmore 2 comes out, but it goes straight to Netflix and skips the theaters entirely. That's just one small example of the many ways the lines between TV and film have blurred. The types of content you're traditionally used to seeing in a movie theater and the type of content we call TV that exclusively streams at home in multiple parts now often looks very similar, is made by the same people using the same equipment and with similar budgets. Over the last 20 years, while this transition has been happening, for most Americans, the habit of going to the theater fell out of style. The American audiences stopped going to the movies and then deciding what to watch there. Instead, they began going to the movies to see a specific film. This change meant they needed to be convinced to attend the theater by a film's marketing. And facing more difficult challenges in drawing people to the theaters, the studio execs found that movies driven by recognizable intellectual property had built-in audiences that were much easier to market to. This is how remakes, reboots, sequels came to dominate the box office in the 2000s. By 2024, not a single one of the top 15 box office hits was an original film. This paid off in the short run. Like the turn towards blockbuster filmmaking in the 1970s, the shift towards large IP-driven franchises like the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the resuscitation of Star Wars has driven record-breaking box office receipts. Referring to these hits as tentpole films, distributors, studios, even critics began to see IP-driven mega hits as the only thing holding up the industry, further pushing out smaller mid-budget offerings. But this approach, which has worked relatively well in the 2010s, is starting to see diminishing returns in the 2020s. With almost no development of new original worlds, stories, ideas, IP, major blockbuster films have become a kind of cultural Ouroboros. Cinema no longer creates the narratives that define the culture. Instead, it relies almost exclusively on its own past cultural influence or existing worlds, characters, and stories from other forms of media for its success. All this while massive tech giants throw billions into developing technologies which threaten to undercut an entire workforce of craftspeople in the industry. Many fear AI tech will be too enticing for studios to pass up, even if it's not what audiences want. Like in the 50s and 60s, cinema is now poised at a decisive moment. And just like cinema and its cultural influence changed significantly from the 40s to 70s, the movie industry that survives this current shift and its cultural influence might look radically different on the other side. Those within the industry and those paying attention to this are already aware of pretty much everything I'm talking about here. There's been plenty of commentary going on about what's happening and how cinema might be able to weather this storm. But this crisis I'm talking about isn't the story I'm telling today. We're gonna look at something underneath all of this that has already quietly transformed what the movies mean. A shift not in the movies themselves and how they're made, but in the very way we perceive them. A change that has already happened, which may be irrevocable, but one which I think we need to understand if we want cinema to survive its current crisis and maintain cultural relevancy.
They think that what they say is communication. Communication is the effect of what you say.
To understand the force I'm talking about, we're gonna have to go back to the mid-century.
The electric age is having a profound effect on us. We are in a period of fantastic change.
A time which, like today, was experiencing a rapidly evolving media landscape. Cinema, radio, television, the telegraph, color print photography, and magazines had all sprung into existence in a generation. While these media feel commonplace to us today, for someone living through that time, it was an incredible shift in the culture. For some, this time represented an overwhelming but exciting new world, one that was defined not by writing or the printed word, but instead by prolific auditory and visual media. Culture rushed to adopt these new forms of media, but it was also grappling with the influence and power that they had.
For example, the advertising, the funny page, the sports, the crossword puzzles. I mean, so many people don't even read the newspaper for the news. They read it only for these things.
And these new little quickie magazines that you pick up that are a few inches high. And in the radio, you have the 5-minute news spots. And that what you only get is the most sensational aspects of what's going on in the world.
In 1928, the League of Nations Child Welfare Committee released a report saying, some delegates expressed fears that cinema performances happening in the dark with promiscuity of sexes and languorous music should excite the child by appealing to his lowest instincts and least noble passions, and that bad habits may result. This was a problem that could easily be remedied, the committee said, if the technology was developed that would allow cinema to be shown in broad daylight. But there were also more serious concerns about the potential for cinema to be used as a propaganda tool by authoritarian governments. Television, of course, did not escape suspicion. There was concern about the amount of violence shown in the westerns and crime dramas that were incredibly popular, but there was also concern about the way television was changing people's habits. A New York Times article from 1949 titled, "What is Television Doing to Us?" reports that whether the art of one person talking to another is to be killed by television is the subject of much energetic debate. What would this do to society? Nearly half of the television owners acknowledge that their choice of an evening to go out is influenced by what programs are on, reported Jack Gold. Political groups and social clubs are feeling the rivalry of television. In the burgeoning modernism of the 20th century, whether it was cinema or television, media itself was becoming the infrastructure of ritual and community for American culture. Increasingly, people were gathering for and around pieces of media rather than civic or religious institutions. Hoping to understand the implications of all this, new figures arose. These new cultural commentators and critics sought to study and understand the messages that these media conveyed and the influence they had on society. In Toronto, Canada, one of the people trying to understand this media landscape was a professor named Marshall McLuhan.
Advertising tells them how they feel about what they have, not what they should have.
McLuhan's work was sprawling, controversial, and shrouded in riddles and poetic language.
At the speed of light, there is no sequence. Everything happens at the same instant. That's acoustic, and everything happens at once. There's no continuity, there's no connection, there's no follow-through. It's just all now.
But his core idea that the mediums themselves were the messages would spark a school of thought that would provide a new way of seeing how media influences culture.
The medium is not something neutral. It does something to people. It takes hold of them, it roughs them up, it massages them, it bumps them around.
This school of thought, developed by McLuhan and expanded by his followers, would come to be known as media ecology. For the media ecologists, an individual medium represented not just a way of conveying individual ideas that we could then judge or interpret. It was a landscape that surrounded us, one which could literally alter our behavior and even the way we think.
When you put a new medium into a play in a given population, all their sensory life shifts a bit.
To understand this, think about how your actual physical environment shapes your behavior. If you live in an arid, mountainous landscape, this will cause you to live a very different life than you would if you lived in an urban landscape. These landscapes don't just affect our habits and lifestyle, but also how we perceive the world. So think about how your physical environment might shape the kinds of sensory information you're attuned to as a person. Someone used to living in a city might easily tune out the sound of an ambulance, while someone living in a rural environment where they're more exposed to the elements might notice specific shifts in air temperature and wind direction that signal an approaching storm. In the same way, the media landscape around you, which is made up of the different individual mediums that you interact with, shapes and influences your behavior. One of McLuhan's key ideas was that each medium extended one of our senses.
The wheel is an extension of the foot. The book is an extension of the eye. Clothing is an extension of the skin. Electric circuitry is an extension of the central nervous system.
While this extension of our senses outward makes us more attuned to certain kinds of information in the environment, he theorized that it also numbs us to other kinds of sensory information.
The extension of any one sense displaces the other senses and alters the way we think.
McLuhan and others theorized that the fundamental technology was language itself. In the same way, your understanding of language and the words in your language can shape how you think about ideas, the other kinds of media that you use to communicate and express yourself also shape the way you behave, see the world, and think. To understand how subtle and nuanced the changes can be that affect our perception of the media we're experiencing, let's talk about something called the Fordham experiment. In the Fordham experiment, they took the same video content and showed it to audiences in two different ways. For some audiences, the videos were projected onto a screen. This means the light is bouncing off a wall and into your eyes. For another audience, the videos were actually played on a screen. This means illuminated pixels were shining directly into the audience's eyes. Each audience would then write about what they watched, and what the experiment discovered was that even when they were viewing the exact same content, there was a dramatic difference in what each audience would write about depending on how they had viewed that piece of content. So for example, for those that watched the content projected onto the screen, only about 6% mentioned losing a sense of time. For the group that watched the content from an illuminated screen, like most of our screens are today, the mentions of losing a sense of time rose to 60%. And this happened with a lot of factors, like whether or not the audience would comment on a specific scene or the cinematic technique. So a relatively subtle change in how the content is presented can lead to a fairly significant change in how the content is perceived, changing what elements of the media we're more likely to notice or focus on. Now that's one relatively subtle shift in form. Think about what happens when there's a larger shift in mediums, where many factors of how a piece of information is conveyed change at once.
In the 1860s, he would have been unthinkable because he can't talk. But you put him on television and he's dynamite.
For a media ecologist like Neil Postman, his primary critique of TV was not the individual programs, but instead the landscape that TV presented.
The voiceover says, more shooting in Beirut today. We see some film of a street, perhaps in Beirut, a body on the floor. We hear shots. This image is powerful. So people know of Beirut. They know there's shooting in Beirut. Do they know who's shooting at whom, or why, or what is the historical context for this?
One of his main concerns was the way television was structured around advertising.
The function of television in America is to gather an audience, which can be sold to advertisers.
Which he theorized significantly diminished its ability to present the serious discussion of anything.
American television knows that the best way to gather an audience is to provide something that is amusing.
TV, according to Postman and McLuhan, converted everything, even disasters and wars, into entertainment. Film editing theory, like the Kuleshov effect, which shows that our perception of the meaning of a shot can change depending on what the filmmaker cuts to next, can help us understand his critique here. How is our perception of the meaning of a serious topic affected when it's juxtaposed against and interrupted by an advertisement for dish soap?
During an air show at Hill Air Base in Utah, a Thunderbird aerobatic jet crashed, killing the pilot.
Hey, look who switched to natural light beer!
Through a traditional lens, we might examine television media by looking at the violence in a specific Western. But through a media ecology lens, we can see that the bigger impact that television had on our culture probably had more to do with the way information was presented on there. But when we adopt a new media landscape, it also changes our social and physical habits. The social gatherings in public that cinema provided gave way to more time spent in intimate family gatherings around the TV in the home. With the rise of TV, some parents were concerned about their children spending less time outside, while others saw this as a good thing, since it was keeping them off the streets. When a large portion of society changes how it spends its hours each day, the implications of this on culture are larger than the influence of whether they're watching a violent Western, cartoons, or the evening news. But perhaps the most important idea for media ecology, for what I want to illustrate for you here, is that from a media ecology perspective, a medium and what it represents and means to a culture cannot be understood in isolation. Because what a medium means to us, the message it conveys, comes not just from its inherent properties, but from how it relates to the other mediums around it. And when we begin to understand this, we'll see clearly how no matter where the industry goes from here, cinema has already undergone a significant transformation into something new.
Fernsehen ist ja nur eine Art Jukebox. Man ist nie im Raum des Kinos und im Raum des Films selber, sondern man hat eine bewegliche Position als Zuschauer und man kann es auch abschalten. Das Kino kann man nicht abschalten.
To understand how the meaning of cinema has evolved, we must first look at what it represented in the past. If we return to the mid-century, even though cinema had already fallen from its peak in the 30s, it was still one of the most significant cultural forces. This was a world where if you wanted to know what was happening or be entertained, you could turn on the TV or turn on the radio, if you're fortunate enough to have one. But using these devices, you would only be able to see or hear whatever happens to be broadcast on the few available channels at that moment. If you're not interested in what's being shown or said at that time, you have no control beyond simply turning it off or changing the channel. And these technologies were still largely built around communal spaces. Families would gather in the living room to watch TV, or the radio might be on in the kitchen. Your media consumption was often linked to the consumption of those around you. To access more information, you'd need to physically retrieve a newspaper or a magazine. The information there would be dense and low fidelity. Illustrations and photographs, written reports of things happening in the world delayed by a day or sometimes weeks or months. For musical entertainment, you could buy or listen to records, turn on the radio, or go to a live performance, again engaging with media experiences that were both curated by others and communal. And then in the midst of all this, say you decide to go see a movie. The movies in this environment share a lot of features with the other media at that time. You still have limited control over what you consume, and you can only go see a movie at the specific showtime. But the movies also stood apart as an entirely unique media experience. In this landscape, the movie was arguably the pinnacle of sensory entertainment. It was the biggest cultural spectacle media could provide. Its images were the biggest and the most vibrant available. Unlike books, newspapers, or magazines, and even the low fidelity of early TV where you had to focus your attention and participate in consuming the media, when watching a movie, you could sit back in the dark and essentially allow the film to wash over you. The movies guided you through the story with an almost hypnotic trance-like quality. You were absorbed. They might sweep you away to another world, transport you to another time, and all of this alongside a crowd of people. It's not hard to see how the movies were one of the most captivating and alluring media experiences at that time. When cinema arrived, it didn't just bring new kinds of art and stories, it introduced culture to a new kind of experience.
Today, the motion picture stands on a plane of achievement few could have foreseen half a century ago.
It was partly a commodification of the theatrical experience, but it was also a ritualistic, social, and almost religious consumption of media. Unlike a play, audiences from all around the country or even the world could be united around having seen the exact same piece of media. But it also introduced a new type of sensory experience. These were large, exciting images that commanded the audience's attention. A movie star could be lit, captured, and projected in a larger-than-life way that would have been impossible in any prior form. Taking into account the media ecology view, we must ask, how did these movies change our perception of ourselves as humans? Unlike the print-dominant forms, cinema was a medium where images, language, and music worked together to create feelings. You could analyze movies, but unlike text, they didn't really require analytical thinking to be understood. All of this together meant that they were a uniquely powerful cultural force. This distinct and uniquely evocative experience that cinema represented within the culture explains why movies like Jaws or The Exorcist could have so much impact and influence. But what changed? Well,
but when I was a boy, we didn't have the telegraph, we didn't have the telephone, of course, nor the electric lights, nor any of these other things which have come up to bother us and help us.
I remember when we didn't have television, and I was forced to be creative all the time and to make up all of my own games and to play at acting all myself, and nothing was ever presented to me so that I could simply sit and absorb it.
The things I'm seeing online is making me I'm just gonna scroll Instagram or something and kind of get my mind off of what's going on. Maybe not Instagram. Yeah, I agree. Probably not Instagram. Oh my God, what is this?
You wake up and immediately open your phone. Whether you choose Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, or Facebook, you're hit with a torrent of shifting information, algorithmically tuned to be the most interesting, attention-grabbing content possible. One flashy image or video after another. You can see videos of the most exciting or horrifying events happening around the world delivered straight into the palm of your hand before you even get out of bed. If you set down your phone and turn to your computer or TV, you have access to almost every kind of recorded media from any time period or part of the globe, available for you to choose from at any time. You can watch an independently produced YouTube channel. You can watch the news in HD showing you violent or catastrophic events. You can watch children's programs. You can watch videos constructed entirely by artificial intelligence.
I tried asking for directions and got sent to a floor that doesn't exist.
Almost anything you can imagine lies at your fingertips, completely at your control to pause, rewind, play again, or share. A lot of attention is given to how social media is shortening our attention spans, but I think the story is much more complicated. A full analysis of smartphones, internet streaming, and social media from a media ecology perspective could be its own hour-long video, so I'm just going to hit some of the highlights here. From a media ecology perspective, people have become acclimated to an environment of rapidly shifting context. We expect an increasing variety of content to be constantly accessible and easily switchable. Increasingly, very little media consumption is communal or tied to a specific time anymore. You might watch a movie or some TV with friends or family, but what you watch is now usually disconnected from what most other people around you are watching. Even if you and a friend are watching the same show, the chances that you both watched the same episode the night before is low. By allowing us to watch whatever we want at any time, streaming has reshaped collective viewing. For internet content, personalization algorithms only push this further. And while the mediums that McLuhan and Postman were examining were relatively simple, with the introduction of the computer, we enter an era that I would describe as hypermediums. These are mediums that themselves contain smaller mediums. So if you're watching this video right now on your phone, the content that I'm sending you is filtered through the medium of the camera and filmmaking. There's certain biases and effects that are inherent to video content itself, but then that's also being filtered through the medium of YouTube, the algorithm, how it's presented to you, the comments and other meta design elements that surround the video. Your perception of what I'm saying is going to be impacted by how positive or negative the comments are, or how many views the video has. And then beyond that, it is additionally being mediated by the form factor of the smartphone itself. The fact that you can carry the video around with you. You might be watching this in bed or on the toilet or on the subway. If you're watching this video on your phone while you try to cook dinner, it's going to have a different psychological impact than if you went into a classroom and sat down and had to pay attention to one thing for 20 minutes. For McLuhan, the mediums of the past become the content of the current mediums, and we're seeing that happen right now. If the video of cinema and television and the words and photos of print are the content of our social media feeds, what is the new medium we're consuming and what is the message of that medium? Well, the medium is the feed itself, the algorithm itself, and our consumption of that. Tech writer Alberto Romero posited that when we're scrolling through short-form video, it's not the content itself that delivers a dopamine hit, but the moment we scroll, the millisecond where we're anticipating what might come next, whether it's something scary, funny, interesting, or boring. It's the hit of anticipation that we're consuming. Here, Neil Postman's concerns about the influence of advertising on a medium, rather than disappearing in the transition from TV to social media, only become more amplified. Like television, the goal of the feed and the algorithm is to gather an audience and sustain that audience's attention so that it can show it more advertising. The result of this is that it will show you not what's best for you or the most important information, but whatever is the most attention grabbing. For mediums of the past like cinema, a book, or a record, by the time you consumed the content, you had already paid for it. Those making the media were incentivized to make the experience a good one so that it spread word of mouth and more people bought it, and so that you might be more likely to buy something from them in the future. But there was no specific incentive to hold your attention for as long as possible. That all changed with television, with the move to an advertising model, where more time spent watching by the viewer translated directly into more money for those creating the content and distributing it. This is an environment where subtlety, nuance, and quietude do exist, but they're fairly niche products delivered to a minority of viewers. The vast majority of what filters to the top of these algorithmically curated platforms is the stuff that will grab and hold your attention. And this affects everything from Netflix and Instagram to the video you're watching right now. A significant aspect of the smartphone is the way it fuses the medium of the remote control with the media itself. The medium of the smartphone is a platform that we use to bring stuff to us or to control what we're seeing or the world around us. There's nothing on our smartphone that we're truly subjected to and don't really have control over. Even the sensation of grasping it in your hand is kind of the ultimate sense of control over the media you're consuming. I'm not saying being able to control our media is bad, and this might seem like a minor difference, but I think it has a significant psychological impact on how we perceive the media as we consume it. The act of craning our necks downward for hours every day literally reshapes our bodies and our experience of the world. We doom scroll, we talk about misinformation, internet bubbles, and write think pieces about the attention economy. Some people are quitting their phones entirely or doing dopamine detoxes, but this is already the water we swim in. If McLuhan and the media ecologists are right, the shift to spending hours a day consuming media through a new medium, our phone, changes not just how we perceive the media on our phone, but the entire world around us. We have stepped into a new media environment, and now we must understand and respond to how it's reshaped our habits, society, and perception. The big takeaway is that in contrast to a lot of the media of the past, the current media landscape emphasizes control, portability, individualization, total participation in a global landscape of media, and perception mediated by desires through an algorithm. Now, within this landscape, think about the experience that going to the movies represents. In the 1970s, when you went to a movie, you were stepping out of a world of relatively low fidelity visual media into an intense multi-hour visual spectacle. In 2025, when you go see a movie, you're probably taking a break from the most overwhelming sensory spectacle humanity has ever created. When you go to the movies, now you're committing to a single piece of media for multiple hours, which you must watch at a predetermined time with a group of people. A piece of media you have no control over. The images on the screen move at a much slower pace than what you're used to seeing on your phone, and if you aren't interested in it, you can't immediately change it to something else. The movies right now are one of the only mediums that can actually sort of force you to focus on and immerse yourself in a single image for a long period of time. You don't have the option of escaping what the movie is presenting to you unless you literally physically move your body out of the space it's being presented in. Even big, exciting action films can feel deliberate and calculated in a world where you can watch this, or this, or this at any moment. So cinema, the medium that used to feel like the height of spectacle, which could send culture into a panic, now often feels like a relatively slow, linear, and focused journey through a single narrative. In this landscape, it's the phones and the content on the phones that are inciting the kind of moral panic and cultural change that The Exorcist did. The printing press, electricity, the telegraph, and television weren't just tools of communication. They allowed society to adopt new shapes, new ways of living and interacting with one another. The rapid adoption of smartphones, social media, algorithmically tuned recommendation feeds, and now AI is currently reshaping the landscape of our society, the same way it was reshaped in the early 20th century by the mediums that arrived then. And cinema's place within this new landscape is different than it was 50 years ago, just like it was different in the 70s than it was in the 1940s. Now, collectively on average, compared to all the other media we consume, it represents something else, a different kind of experience. My goal with all of this is not to construct a narrative that phones are bad and movies are good. For McLuhan, the media ecology approach wasn't about trying to make moral assessments about which mediums were better than others.
I seek to perceive, not to conceive what's in front of me. And perception is exploration.
Instead, he was more interested in trying to just develop a clear understanding of the media environment we're actually living in. I do think there are some notable downsides to the hypermodern media landscape we all live in now. And I think we should do everything we can to document, understand, and then overcome whatever negative effects these new mediums might have. But especially for those old enough to have one foot in the media environment of the past, it can be easy to fall into a kind of understandable nostalgia.
Every time a new environment forms with a new medium, people go back and live in the old one,
where we hold up the mediums of the past as somehow more morally pure than the mediums that are most popular today. This has happened with things like the novel, which was initially treated as populist distraction, while today there's almost a moral panic about the fact that fewer people read literature. And we're seeing this happen with movies. When the big blockbusters of the 70s came out, a lot of filmmakers and critics wrote them off as populist escapism, but now they're treated as something closer to a form of art. It would be easy to romanticize film somehow as a more pure or unblemished form of media, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. The movies have downsides. Producing it is much less accessible to the average person, and so channels of distribution have traditionally been controlled by corporate interests. Right now, for example, No Other Land, an Oscar-winning documentary about Palestine, is not available for viewing in the United States 6 months after winning because nobody's been willing to distribute it here. Cinema's power as a transporting, emotional, and almost hypnotizing storytelling medium is what makes it so enticing, but it's also what makes it a powerful tool for intentionally and sometimes unintentionally perpetrating harmful ideas and stereotypes propagandistically. Cinema propaganda wasn't just an issue in Nazi Germany. It continues to be produced in subtle and sometimes insidious ways that audiences often don't even realize. Another limiting factor for cinema is how it has been transformed from an affordable cultural commodity into what is almost a luxury experience. Back in the 40s, when over 60% of Americans were attending the cinema, a movie ticket was only 25 cents, which would be about $4 today. These days, for many Americans, a trip to the movies can be cost prohibitive, pushing it further towards being an activity reserved for special occasions and the upper class. So as much as I have deep concerns about the new hypermodern technologies like phones, social media, short-form video, etc., this is not about vilifying or blaming those things in order to say cinema is somehow inherently perfect or a great medium by contrast. But neither is my goal to proclaim that cinema is dead. This time it's real, and now I've found the true culprit. When Wim Wenders made a documentary asking the question, is cinema about to be a dead language, many of the filmmakers he interviewed seemed to think it would be. I think instead the opposite is true. The language of cinema is far from dead. Instead, it's been absorbed by the mainstream culture as the primary language of communication. A lot of the media we now consume on our TVs and phones uses cinematic language. These mediums are essentially a form of post-cinema that adopt the visual grammar of filmmaking. In this world dominated by visual cinematic grammar instead of literary grammar, valuing and studying the cinematic roots of all this is only becoming more important. So I'm saying the movies have changed, and on average probably won't quite feel the same. But that doesn't mean I think they've ceased to be relevant, that they won't continue in some way to provide interesting, meaningful, culturally relevant experiences and play a role in the media landscape for a long time to come. But if we want that to happen, if we want moviegoing to continue to be an accessible medium for people, we need to give up false hope that cinema will magically return to what it was in a previous time, and stop trying to force it to compete with the new media landscape by being something that it isn't. Instead, the way forward for cinema is to understand exactly what it has to offer to us that social media, phones, and television cannot.
Vital ist und dort, wo Leben am direktesten in uns hineingeht, ist eben das Kino. Und das wird eben doch überleben. Immer nur das wird eben überleben.
So let's talk about how cinema can survive. It's very possible in the future we'll go down a path where a movie is just a different type of content that plays on our TV or phone like everything else. In this future, theater screenings will be treated as rare events or simply a marketing ploy. We're already headed in this direction to some extent. But I don't want this to happen, and I think it can be avoided. So let's look at how. First, like it did in the 20th century, cinema could once again become bigger. This is already happening. The increasing prevalence and promotion of IMAX represents this century's version of VistaVision or CinemaScope. And this does work to some extent. Better sound along with bigger, more immersive visuals can still provide some of the grandest sensory experiences available in media today. Some filmmakers like Michael Bay even seem to be competing with the intensity and rapid-fire pacing provided by internet video. But while I love the trend towards impressive large-format filmmaking with great sound design, and watching this scene from Sinners on a big screen is one of the best media experiences I've had this year, I think trying to consistently outcompete internet media in terms of creating the largest sensory spectacle is ultimately a losing battle. Your phone might be tiny in comparison, but it provides pure, uncut, dopaminergic entertainment and novel images in a way that even the biggest cinematic images these days will struggle to keep up with. I'm not saying internet video is better or that these bigger, more cinematic movies are bad. I just don't think cinema will win if it's trying to be the entertainment spectacle of culture when we're carrying around one of the most intense media spectacles ever created in our pockets every day. Instead, where cinema can win is where it continues to provide something that your phone cannot. And this lies in its ability to use that sensory experience to immerse you in an emotional narrative. The biggest advantage that cinema has going for it is time and focus. Cinema is one of the only forms of storytelling remaining that asks you to sit and give your full attention to a complete story for an unbroken 2 to 3 hour chunk of time. Sure, you might binge watch a TV show or doom scroll for 3 hours, but those aren't contained narrative experiences consumed in a single sitting. Short-form video shifts your attention every few seconds, and TV breaks for episodes and ads, and happens exclusively at home in a distraction-laden environment. You can listen to a podcast or audiobook for 3 hours, but again, that 3 hours won't be an entire complete narrative, and you likely won't be giving it your undivided attention. You're probably listening to it while you do something else. With a movie, you're locked into a single, overwhelming experience for hours with no breaks or division points. And while obviously people are going to whip out their phones, even at the theater, the key is that the intention of the form is for you to be mentally immersed in a complete story without distractions. And even if not everyone consumes it this way, this changes what it is. A lot of TV is specifically made to be on in the background. Netflix specifically produces what it calls second screen content with the expectation that audiences are going to watch it while they're on their phones. So this means that even if you sat down and completely immersed yourself in one of these Netflix shows that is made to be on in the background, you aren't going to get the same experience as if you immersed yourself in something that was made to be immersed in. This means that even if you aren't on your phone while you're watching a show made to be on in the background, you're still watching something that has been made for the level of attention of someone who is. Movies, meanwhile, are usually made for the theatrical experience, where an audience is going to give it their undivided attention. When people hear filmmakers say, "This is made for the big screen," I think it's sometimes perceived as elitist or nostalgic posturing, but having the theatrical experience as the end goal for filmmakers as they create the movie really shapes the kinds of movies that filmmakers will make and how they make them. When a movie is made for an environment where you're supposed to give it your full attention, the effects of that will impact the viewing experience even if you end up watching that movie at home. Cinema's unique demands on our attention and time in this media landscape means that movies are asking a lot more of an audience in terms of time and attention commitment relative to other media today. But this is exactly what makes them a particularly powerful form of media in the landscape. Given this commitment of time and attention, filmmakers have a unique opportunity to sweep up and transport audiences in an emotional, evocative experience that other kinds of media might not be able to. Movies that really want to succeed today need to understand the bargain they're striking with audiences and at least attempt to deliver something worthwhile in return for what they're asking. But within this space, movies also now have an opportunity to be something much more inherently meditative and contemplative. I don't mean that all movies need to be slow art house fare, although I think that's great and more people should give it a shot. I mean, even a basic drama can create space to think about a single subject, character, idea, world, or feeling for hours in a way that audiences probably aren't doing with with other media they're consuming. I think the movies that will stay relevant will be the ones that use this time in a way that rewards the audience for doing so, instead of just providing cheap entertainment escapes. It's not that cheap entertainment escapes are bad, or that movies should never try to do that, but those are now freely available in your pocket whenever you want, and paying $20 to go sit in a room for a cheap entertainment escape won't feel as worthwhile when you can get one for free at home. We also need to recognize and lean into the communal value of movie theaters and the movies themselves. These days, I often hear people complain about the theatrical experience. People are on their phones or there's distractions, but there can really be a magic to watching a film with a group of people, and the movies need to try to retain that. Even when everyone is quiet, you can feel something. The experience changes when you're with people. And in the same way, movies being made for theaters impacts the demands they place on our attention. Movies being made for theaters also means they're made to be watched with a group of people. I love watching movies alone, but most of my best movie memories involve a theatrical or group experience. Even at home, the movie night creates a unique social opportunity for a group to experience a complete narrative together in a way that pretty much no other media currently provides. Sure, you can watch TV together, but it's hard to do that with a group of people who are all living different lives. You have to coordinate together to watch the same show and all be on the same episode at the same time. Consuming a movie with a group provides a unique opportunity to all experience a single narrative together and then discuss it afterwards. In our increasingly socially fragmented and individualistic society, where our media consumption is more and more specialized and presented on tiny screens just for us to see, there's a value in getting to experience something more communal. And movie theaters, with their progression towards premium experiences and larger multiplexes, have kind of been leaning away from the value of the communal experience rather than into it. Theaters are often trying to compete with streaming by trying to make the theater as comfortable as your living room. But while I love a heated lounger as much as anyone, I think this might not be the most productive approach. Many of the best theatrical experiences I've had come from smaller, less comfortable indie theaters in my town, where even obscure movies would sell out and there was a sense of community surrounding each screening. Theaters can lean into this more by making memberships more affordable and accessible, and by providing lounge and gathering areas outside the screens instead of literally designing the spaces to minimize human contact and interaction, shuttling you like cattle in and out of the screen. I'm not insinuating these are the only things that make the movies valuable these days, or that this is an easy or surefire way to save cinema, but I think if the movies want to continue to carve out a valuable, vibrant, successful place in the media landscape of today, they need to capitalize on what makes them unique, instead of trying to morph into what everything else is in order to compete with that. Or doing mostly what's been happening, sticking its head in the sand, pretending the problem will go away while the box office slowly continues to shrink. This narrative I've been crafting focuses mainly on Hollywood, American moviegoing, and the blockbusters that draw the largest crowd. And while similar dynamics are playing out around the world, each country has its own unique set of cultural, economic, and political dynamics that affect how well the theatrical experience thrives. And the world of indie and international film, along with many independent boutique theaters, are already leaning into much of what I'm describing here and how they make movies and present them. If the studios want to stay relevant, Hollywood will have to catch on. Otherwise, they're fated to continue down the path they're already on, towards simply becoming content production engines for their own streaming platforms, which will compete with all the other content on the internet. The movies should be interesting, thoughtful, and worth your time. They should continue to be immersive, visual, sonic, sensory experiences. They should continue to be communal experiences, an event that we go to or consume with a group at home, rather than just another piece of content to be consumed the same way we consume anything else. not because of some kind of elitism where cinema is superior, but because it offers us a unique media and cultural experience that other forms of media don't. Cinema will never again have the kind of cultural dominance it had in the 40s, and it's unlikely it will even return to the influence it had in the 70s. To imagine it would be wishful nostalgia. But as the industry faces the biggest shakeup it's seen in 80 years, I believe it can continue to be a valuable and relevant cultural experience for a long time to come, as long as we value it for what is actually unique about its ability to transport us together.
When you sell them happiness, when you sell them narcotics, when you sell them fictionalized news, to sustain their security, they accept it, and they begin to accept that as truth.
One of the most important things we can apply a media ecology lens to is the news. We need to understand that it's not just the content or information conveyed by the news, but the way news is conveyed that shapes our understanding of the world. And one of the best tools that I know of for understanding the modern news landscape is my sponsor for this video, Ground News. Ground News doesn't just show you the news, it gives you the tools you need to truly understand the news. Each story is surrounded by a bunch of meta context. It tells you the political bias of each outlet reporting the story, and even lets you quickly compare and browse through different headlines so you can see the way a story is represented in a headline shapes our understanding of the events being reported. Take a look at this recent story about Stephen Colbert's show being canceled. A quick survey of the headlines shows us the contrast in how different media outlets represent this story, which can give something a positive or negative spin. One of my favorite features is the blind spots feed, which shows you stories that are being underreported by both the left and the right. Ground News is a great way to not just consume the news, but I think understand the narratives that are being conveyed through the news every day. You can check out Ground News for free, but you can get access to the blind spot feed and all the other premium features when you sign up for a Vantage subscription, which you can get for 40% off when you use my code at ground.news/ThomasFlight. Click the link in the description below or go to ground.news/ThomasFlight to get that 40% off your Vantage subscription today. I offer Ground News some of the attention you've given me so that I can afford to keep making these videos. When you become a patron, you can get access to the film club where I choose movies for us to discuss, along with movie reviews. You can sign up at patreon.com/ThomasFlight.